Look at the shirt you're wearing right now. It might say it was made in Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, somewhere thousands of miles away. But have you ever wondered how it actually got to you? Before it ended up in your closet, it traveled across the world inside a simple metal box. In fact, chances are almost everything around you is done the same. Your phone, your shoes, your TV, even the chair you're sitting on, they all made the same journey. But this system, so normal today, didn't always exist. Just a few decades ago, global trade was slow, chaotic, and incredibly expensive. Until one simple idea changed everything. Before the 1950s, shipping was nothing like it is today. There was no standard, no system. Every item shipped across the ocean had to be handled individually. Bags of grain, barrels of oil, crates of machinery, bales of cotton, each one a different shape, each one requiring different handling. This method was called break bulk shipping, and it defined global trade for centuries. Here's what it actually looked like. When a manufacturer in Cincinnati wanted to ship goods to London, those goods were loaded by hand, carried on backs on hand trucks, swung up on ropes, and stuffed into the belly of a ship like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Workers had to balance the weight, protect fragile items, and maximize every inch of space. It was skilled, grueling work. And when the ship arrived at its destination, you did the whole thing in reverse. Loading and unloading a single medium-sized vessel could take a week, sometimes two. The cost was staggering. For every dollar spent moving cargo across the ocean, another dollar, sometimes more, went toward handling it on the docks. And money was only part of the problem. Theft was rampant. When hundreds of men are handling thousands of individual items with minimal tracking, things disappear. Damage was constant. A barrel falls, a crate gets crushed, rain gets in, salt air corrodes. By the time goods reached their destination, a meaningful share were degraded or missing entirely. The result? Ships weren't expensive to operate because of the sailing. They were expensive because of the waiting. All of this meant one thing. Global trade was slow, expensive, and largely out of reach for ordinary businesses. If you were a manufacturer in 1950, selling your product in Europe or Asia was a logistical nightmare. The costs were too high, the risks were too great. The world stayed divided until one man decided he was tired of it. Malcolm McLean grew up in rural North Carolina, the son of a farmer. When he graduated high school in 1931, right in the depths of the Great Depression, college wasn't an option. He pumped gas at a local service station and saved every dollar he could. By 1934, he had saved enough to buy a second-hand truck for $120. That truck was the start of everything. Over the next 2 decades, McLean built his trucking operation into one of the largest in the country. By the early 1950s, he ran 1,776 trucks and 37 transport terminals up and down the eastern seaboard. He was relentless about efficiency, always looking at the gap between how things were done and how they could be done. But the idea that would change the world didn't come in the 1950s. It came much earlier, in 1937. McLean was 24 years old. He'd driven a load of cotton bales down from the Carolinas to a pier in New Jersey, and now he was sitting in his truck at the dock, waiting for hours, watching longshoremen unload cargo piece by piece, then load it all back onto a ship. And he had a thought that sounds almost too simple. What if my trailer could just be lifted up and placed on the ship, without anyone touching what's inside? Take the trailer off the truck, put it on the ship, sail it across, lift it off on the other end, put it on a new truck, nobody opens it, nobody repacks it, no sorting, no handling. It sounds obvious, but here's the thing. McLean sat on that idea for nearly 18 years. Not because he forgot about it, because the world wasn't ready for it. The regulations, the unions, the infrastructure, the money, every single piece of the existing system was built to resist exactly what he was imagining. It would take until the mid-1950s, and a willingness to risk absolutely everything before he got his chance. By 1955, the trucking business was getting squeezed. States had started cracking down with weight restrictions and road fees. The more McLean grew, the more regulations bit into his margins. He needed a way around them, and his mind kept drifting back to that dock in New Jersey. Back to 1937. He decided it was time. He acquired Pan Atlantic Steamship Company for $7 million, giving him shipping rights at key East Coast ports. But there was an immediate problem. Regulators said he couldn't own both a trucking company and a shipping line at the same time. It violated the Interstate Commerce Act. So McLean had a choice. Keep the empire he had spent over 20 years building, or bet everything on the idea he'd been carrying since 1937. He chose the idea. He sold his 75% stake in McLean Trucking for $6 million. He secured a $22 million bank loan, bought 2 surplus World War II oil tankers, and began converting them. He reinforced the decks. He designed a standardized steel container, uniform dimensions, stackable, lockable, with specially engineered corner fittings that could be secured to a ship's deck. He renamed the company Sealand Industries. His friends thought he had completely lost his mind. And there's one more detail that says everything about the kind of man McLean was. He never patented the container. He deliberately made the design available to the entire industry, including every one of his competitors, because he understood that a box only changes the world if everyone uses the same box. On April 26, 1956, a converted tanker called the Ideal X left Port Newark, New Jersey. On its deck, 58 aluminum containers. It arrived in Houston 5 days later. The math was immediate and devastating. Loading cargo the traditional way cost $5.83 per ton. Loading those containers, 16 cents per ton. Not 10%, not 50%, 97% cheaper in a single voyage. What McLean had proven wasn't just that boxes were cheaper. It was something more fundamental. The box itself could be the unit of trade, not the goods inside it. You stop thinking about what's in the container and start thinking about moving the container. That shift in thinking would rewire global commerce. But the idea didn't sweep the world overnight. In fact, it hit a wall. Railroads sued McLean for violating commerce laws. The International Longshoremen's Association, the union representing dock workers, was furious. Before containers, ports needed armies of workers. Containerization threatened to make most of that labor obsolete. On the day the Ideal X sailed out of Port Newark, a senior official from the Longshoremen's Union stood at the dock watching. When someone asked what he thought of McLean's new ship, he said, "I think they ought to sink this son of a." He wasn't wrong to be scared. Within a decade, containerization had wiped out tens of thousands of dock jobs. Manhattan's port, once the busiest in the world, collapsed. Longshoremen workdays there fell from 1.4 million in the mid-1960s to just 127,000 10 years later. Entire port communities were hollowed out. Meanwhile, brand new container ports like Newark and Elizabeth exploded in size. The geography of global trade was being redrawn almost overnight, and the old port cities, the ones that couldn't or wouldn't adapt, were left behind. Here's the thing about McLean's container. It was only one piece of the puzzle. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, as other shipping lines rushed to copy the idea, every single company built their own version. Different lengths, different heights, different locking mechanisms. Cranes built for one company's containers were useless for another's. The system worked in isolated pockets, but it couldn't connect. Imagine trying to build a global highway system where every car manufacturer used a completely different wheel size. That's what early containerization looked like. The real breakthrough, the one that made everything possible, was standardization. It took until the late 1960s and heavy involvement from the International Standards Organization for the industry to agree on what we now take for granted. The 20-foot and 40-foot container with universal corner castings that fit any crane, any ship, any rail car, anywhere in the world. Only then could a box leave a factory in Shenzhen and arrive at a warehouse in Ohio without anyone touching what was inside. By the end of the 1960s, Sealand Industries operated 27,000 trailer-type containers, 36 ships, and had access to over 30 ports. In 1969, R.J. Reynolds purchased the company for $160 million, a staggering return on McLean's original bet. But the real payoff wasn't financial, it was civilizational. Between 1980 and 2020, global trade volume increased more than 4 times. Over 90% of world trade now travels by sea. By the end of the 20th century, container shipping carried approximately 90% of the world's cargo. Countries like China became manufacturing giants because the cost of moving things dropped so dramatically that it made sense to build a shirt on one side of the planet and sell it on the other. Supply chains stretched across continents. Products stopped being made in one place. They were assembled globally, with components from a dozen different countries. The modern economy, the one we all live inside, was built on the assumption that moving things is cheap. That assumption was created by a steel box. Today, the largest container ships carry over 20,000 containers at once. They cross oceans almost silently, invisible to most of the world, essential to everything in it. But it's worth pausing on what was lost. Because the same efficiency that made global trade cheap also made it fragile. This system, so perfectly optimized, has almost no slack in it. When one port slows down, shelves empty halfway around the world. When one shipping lane gets disrupted, factories stop. The entire global economy runs on the assumption that the boxes keep moving. And when they don't even briefly, you feel it everywhere. That's the trade-off McLean's box created. A world more connected than ever before, and more dependent than ever before. Malcolm McLean never set out to reshape the global economy. He was a truck driver who was tired of waiting. He looked at a broken, inefficient system, one that everyone had simply accepted, and asked a question that turned out to change everything. Why are we moving this stuff out of the box? The shipping container didn't just change logistics. It redefined what was possible in trade, in manufacturing, in the way nations relate to each other. It quietly built the modern world, all from a simple steel box.